The traditional lead-based marketing playbook is broken. Buyers no longer act alone. They operate in groups, researching independently, collaborating internally, and making decisions collectively. Many of the buying committee will never go to your website, fill out a form, or download a white paper. Yet many marketing and revenue teams still chase MQLs that barely scratch the surface of actual intent or influence. At the same time, AI promises to revolutionize personalization at scale, but without the right data foundation and go-to-market alignment, it often adds more noise than value. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revenue Lounge. I'm your host, Randy Likas, and in this episode, we'll dive deep into what it takes to move from an outdated MQL-based strategy to a buyer group-first approach, powered by clean data, AI-driven personalization, and cross-functional collaboration. We'll explore what modern revenue marketing looks like and how to build the systems, structures, and mindset required to drive meaningful pipeline in this new era. And joining me today is Heather Adams. Heather is the head of revenue marketing at Socure. Her passion is creating synergy between sales and marketing teams that are focused on enterprise technology solutions. She's been at the forefront of developing marketing strategies designed to help B2B sales teams drive revenue. Heather, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
I am as well. It's a topic that I'm passionate about and one that we help companies solve for here at Nektar. So we're going to just dive in and have a really rich conversation. So Heather, maybe you just walk us through a bit about your background, your career journey, and what your current role is at Socure.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. So I started my career probably more years ago than I'd like to admit, but fresh out of college with a marketing degree, I ended up in a sales position. So I feel like I'm really thankful for that experience because it helped me set a lot of context around how the sales process works, how to drive deals forward, and really kind of having that revenue orientation at the forefront for the entirety of my marketing career. I really realized that what I really loved once I moved into a marketing role was in an environment where is really focused on enterprise sale, like larger average deal sizes with long sales cycles, and then how well an ABM approach is really central to that. So I've been in enterprise technology marketing for the last 15 or so years and really have seen a lot of evolution over that period of time and excited of where the market continues to lead us.
Yeah, that's great. And growth marketing is this term that sometimes people have some functions underneath them and they don't have others. I'm just curious, what does growth marketing mean at Socure and what are the different functions that you lead?
Yeah, so we call it revenue marketing, but it encompasses our campaigns team, which is very ABM focused, our digital and demand team, marketing operations, and then in our environment here, we call them MDRs, market development reps. It's an evolution, in our opinion, from the typical SDR motion, and we try to really utilize a strategic approach, but that team also reports into revenue marketing.
That's awesome. So let's dive into the topic. So MQLs have long been the cornerstone that I think most B2B marketing organizations have measured themselves against. In your experience, why do you think they no longer work in today's complex buying landscape? And what made you all start to think about moving away from MQL to a new buying group model?
Yeah, I think it's highly related to our very strong enterprise focus and the fact that we're doing large enterprise deals with some of the largest organizations in the verticals that we approach. And it became very clear that a single-threaded one-person conversion is not what you should base your future revenue success upon. And so I think back when SiriusDecisions released the demand funnel and we finally as marketers had a way to prove our worth, right, through conversions, conversion tracking, and then attribution. But realizing there's so many flaws in that model that really can point you actually in the wrong direction. Some examples of that is we know a lot of the buyer journey is conducted in stealth today. People are very hesitant to fill out forms, and MQLs are by nature very dependent upon that. We know also in enterprise deals, we want to get to that person in the buyer group that I'm sure we'll talk about more, right? That's the decision maker or the champions, the people that are really going to help move the deal forward. Oftentimes an MQL is based upon someone within that group, but maybe someone with less authority downloading your white paper, doing the research as they're trying to maybe shortlist a group of vendors that they want to continue in conversation with. And MQLs often point you or get you started way too low in the conversation. So both of those things just really have been becoming apparent, and then just knowing that we've got 10, 15 people in a 6-7 figure deal decision, we really have to get to the larger group that are going to impact the decision, and so we really need to engage with that buyer group versus just one person with an MQL.
Yeah, it's spot on, and it's just the way that the world that we live in today, especially as you said with enterprise deal cycles with 10, 15 people, that key decision maker is maybe having somebody on their team doing the work, but they're remaining behind the scenes and not showing up until later on in the deal. One person that I highly admire, and we were talking in the green room that we both know, is Kerry Cunningham, and he's got really great thought leadership around this topic. Kerry and I have spoken multiple times, and he shared this with me. One of the biggest barriers he thinks to getting people to adopt a more modern practice is their inability to measure things at the buyer group level or see things at the buyer group level. And most marketing leadership and executives, they understand that the current MQL model is broken, but despite its flaws, they still cling to them. And from his perspective, it's because they don't have necessarily a good way to measure a new way, and they can't not measure things, right? So they revert back to measuring the wrong thing and cling to MQL models. And so he and I riffed on this topic a little bit, and if I kind of had to summarize, I think it really comes down to three things. One is alignment, in which we're going to talk about today, is how do we move away from this idea of marketing sourced or giving credit to one group and aligning the go-to-market organization around shared KPIs. The other is, and it's related, is this attribution. Like, it's such a hard thing to do when you're trying to engage multiple stakeholders. You've got long sales cycles. There's so many touch points, data hygiene issues. So it gets back to that measurement problem, right? Is that most opportunities rarely capture all of those people that are influencing deals. They might have one person initially because when the MDR passed it over, they had that person, but sales rarely updates those opportunities. So it's hard to make those connection points. But I'd love to get your perspective on this. And how did you get your organization shifted their focus maybe on those KPIs or that alignment from that MQL-based model to embrace the buying group motion?
Yeah, and I don't know that we're all the way there on that journey. It's a continuing journey because you still have boards, you have new sales leaders that come in that are used to that sort of marketing versus sales source modeling. And so it continues to come up in conversation. But I think at the core of it is getting to a place where the marketers and the commercial team have that constant touch base and have a constant conversation going. And I think we all know that it's not a one person that's going to get attribution for the deal, yet it still comes up on how we're going to measure this. So one way that we did it is really build that foundation and that alignment between marketing, sales, and the MDR team, the SDR team, as we're looking at sourcing pipeline, and have a regular cadence both with sales leadership and individual sellers, in which that team is coming together every single week, looking at having data be at the core of that conversation. So whether it's first party intent engagement data, whether it's third party intent data, looking at kind of a landscape of all of the data signals that we're seeing coming in from that book of business, and then determining together how we're going to action and doing it as a team. So when we get together each week in those core groups, it would be a campaign leader, an MDR, and an AE, looking at the data and intent that we've seen that week, and then determining our action plan of the AE is going to go on this mission with maybe these decision makers or executive sponsors. We're going to look for areas where we can introduce in our executives, perhaps even at a higher level to that. What are the actions that the campaign leader can move against those folks that are showing intent and showing that they might be in market? And then what are the tasks that the MDR are going to execute? And then coming back each week and looking at that, what was successful, what wasn't, building that as the foundation. And then our metrics evolve from there. So it's looking at the engagement at the book of business level, at the account level, and then a metric around how are we effectively engaging those folks within the buyer group from the campaign motions, from the AE motions, and from the MDR motions. So that kind of gives us an overall account engagement metric, and we can see where our most engaged accounts and where we're lacking, like where we don't have enough coverage. And we have KPIs around that and a dashboard to show us that. So that's at the very base operational level. And then as we move up to what we would present to sales leadership and even our executive team or the board, then we're really just focusing in on a combined metric of how we as a team have evolved the pipeline and the deals that are in pipeline working together as a team. So trying to pull as much of the taking credit for this or that, because we know it's going to take touch points from both of those teams to move these large buying groups forward. So I think that's the best way to move down that path. Not that bumps are going to not come up in the road, but that's having that holistic approach across functionally is how we really set that in motion for what we're doing today.
And about how long have you been operating in this new cadence or this new motion?
So I would say probably really focused on it for a little over 2 years, but it's been a building process every step of the way. So now we're at the point of kind of fine tuning. But yeah, it was not a quick process. You can't do this overnight and just build it, because a lot of what you're doing is building trust with these cross-functional stakeholders over a period of time. You got to come to every one of those weekly syncs and deliver value from all areas, or the string in this is going to make the whole sweater unravel.
Yeah. So if we go back like maybe 2.5 years ago, right before you started, I imagine when, introducing this idea, there was probably a little bit of friction, or probably a little bit of nervousness, to your point, maybe not the trust there. And I'm curious, how do you overcome those obstacles? Or how did you bring people along, I guess is the question.
So we started with the thesis that if we came to the table to these weekly syncs with the data that we had from our various tools, which was much less evolved at that point, but just like data on who's engaging with the campaigns, data on, as we look at the intent from the accounts we're going after. If we can bring that data set to these calls and the AEs can see value week over week, we're going to start to get traction. So we had almost no adoption right off the bat. We set up these syncs, and then we had a few AEs that really leaned in, right? They got it. They're like, yeah, this can help move us forward. They partnered very closely with their MDR. They provided coaching back to them. They helped them with approaches for messaging. And so we had a couple of folks that really took off in that regard, and they were seeing success. So as soon as sellers could see success from their peers, then more and more people wanted in on the play. So we started small, we got the adoption, and then we really just promoted the adoption and the results it was driving, and it made more people want to get involved in the program.
Success breeds success, right? When people are starting to really see the benefits, other people are like, well, what are you doing? I want some of that, right?
Exactly.
So let's switch gears a little bit, and let's actually talk about intent and signals, and how to identify and engage those stakeholders, maybe that aren't filling out the form or aren't coming to the website, but are really critical to get engaged in part of the buying group. What tools or processes have been most effective for you? Think about intent.
So Sixth Sense is what really got us on the start with that approach. We leverage it heavily in these weekly stand-ups that I was telling you about. We're just strong adopters of their sales intelligence, so we're able to see which accounts for that book of business that have been noted as target accounts are we seeing signals, whether it be just like with the keywords that we're tracking related to the things that we're solving, or competitive keywords. We're seeing all of the interactions across all of our programs. So whether it's engagement in an email that we've sent, a targeted email that we've sent, whether it's engagement in our ad programs, like engagement in a webinar or in a personal event, like all of that is aggregated and we can see that in one pane view. And so we've relied on that kind of heavily as part of that call to point us in the direction of someone that's could be in market, because you can outreach and email all day long. If that customer doesn't have budget and an initiative and a problem to solve, you're just wasting your cycle. So we really use that to hone in where we think we're seeing some signs of life, as well as just dashboards that are a little bit more granular on our different programs that are aligned to that account. So we're trying to pick up any signal we can to see a sign of life.
And I mentioned this briefly where, it's difficult sometimes to get sales to add the people to the opportunities. And so I'm just curious, like, how have you operationalized that so that you can actually see, here's where we've had our touch points and our investments, and here's where they're showing up in the opportunities?
Yeah, so we really dove in and we're proactive on that. Like, I think many organizations face the thing that sales folks are only required to put one contact role on an op.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not even the right one. So we really took control of that, and for our target accounts, worked together with our campaigns team and our SDR team to really source a buyer group for each of those accounts. And then we've got those captured and we can track against them. We also, though, really closely partner with sales, because on QBRs, there's org charts all the time that have the whole buyer group there. Half of the time, those aren't all in Salesforce. So we've really been proactive in aggregating that disparate information proactively and making sure like we're capturing that so we can track against it, which hasn't been an easy task. It's been something that's had to evolve over multiple quarters and cycles, but like it builds upon itself, right? And so we really took a proactive approach to making sure that was captured, because we knew it was going to be integral to show success.
And was that a function of just bringing sales along, like the friction maybe that sort of got them as part of the evolution there? Is it like, well, I don't have time to do this? It sounds like you made a lot of progress, but early on when trying to get them
I mean,
to do that,
early
was it
on,
like the
we did.
carrot or the stick?
Yeah, early on, we just took it upon ourselves to do that as
Right.
marketers and as the SDR team to go and research and bring a starting point to the table of this based on our ICP and our personas is who we believe is right. Who are we missing? It's much easier to get a seller to tell you who you're missing or who maybe
Right.
seems off target and then do some iterations from there. But that's the way that we found is just come to the table with what we think and iterate from there.
Yeah. Now, so Sixth Sense was a very important, integral part of the strategy. Did you find you had to make any other changes to the tech stack in order to be able to move to this model?
We really tried to take every part of our tech stack. So in our Marketo workflows, we're very hyper-focused on our target accounts, having flows there. We have a chat, Drift as our chatbot tool, right? And so we've got ABM workflows there. We're doing champion tracking. So we invested in champion tracking technology that is showing strong early results of seeing the folks that we know we've interacted with before, knowing when they make a move to a new target account so that we can very proactively congratulate them and have a message track to re-engage them at the new role. So those are some of the main technologies that are also incorporated into our overall approach.
Yeah. What, if you had to start over, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently along the journey?
That's a good question. If we had to start over now, I mean, I think, gosh, that's a good question. I think it probably took us a little bit of time to get to this kind of refined approach of going after the buyer group through different fits and starts, still trying to lean a little more heavily on programs that required a form submission. And so I think getting that buyer group defined more quickly and efficiently probably would have moved us forward more quickly than the path that we took.
Yep. So I've spoken with some other folks who've adopted like a buying group motion early, and one company in particular that's been all over the speaking circuit is Palo Alto Networks, and they talk about this idea of buying group completeness, which is if we've got 5 personas that we know we need to have engaged in our deals, and when we get X% improvement, a lift to it in a win rate, we want to be able to measure the buying group completeness, right? So in their world, a network admin is one persona. So we're talking to 5 people, but they're only that one persona. We've really only got a 20% completeness of our buying committee, and we know we need to do other tactics to get those other 4 personas involved to get to 60, 80, 100% buying group completeness. I'm curious, are you doing anything like that as well, as far as like thinking about when we see X percentage of our buying group persona completeness, we know that we're able to increase our win rates by X%. Have you been able to get to that level of detail at all?
So we're measuring against the aggregate buyer group, but I love, like, that is a brilliant idea to take it down one more level and have a checkbox for, like, here's the key components of the buyer group. So yeah, I think we're going to start looking at that. Thanks for that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So curious, what have you seen since moving to this model compared to previously?
So another change that we made at the beginning of the year is we really went all in on a verticalized approach and a very finite, specific list of target accounts. And we're literally running almost all of our motion around that. Another change that we made in our outreach is we've got 100% personalized, which we're using a lot of AI to help us get there, because as we know, personalization can be very resource intensive. So the combination of those two things, we've seen in the overall deals that we have been able to source year to date over the same period last year. And we're seeing that 80% of those are within our target accounts, and then we have some organic inbound opportunities that are coming in, but we've seen both the quality and then the size of those opportunities increase at a pretty high pace since we've pulled those levers at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. We talked a little bit earlier about the importance to engage those stakeholders who aren't visiting the website or downloading the form. And I'm just curious, like, what strategies have you employed to engage those folks? And what kind of personalization do you think works best to get maybe those second, third line stakeholders that come in about a little bit later?
Yeah, so one thing that we're really looking at is when we're seeing that engagement is really proactively building out who's the likely group around those folks, right? We may see some engagement from one person that's on the buyer group team, but then how do we create an approach that's going to engage multiple stakeholders so we get a convergence of engagement across the team? And so what we're really looking at, and what we're really seeing that resonates with buyers, is looking at where we've solved in lookalike companies and provided lift in results. And so that's something that's really central to our sales motion, like doing a proof of concept and understanding what's working for these different customers. So then we can take that data and use that to share with lookalike accounts. So, we were able to solve here for X, Y, and Z. These were some of the big challenges that they were facing, and that seems to really resonate. And so we take that and spin the messaging in thinking about the KPIs for the person that we're talking to. So if it's a product leader versus a revenue-focused individual versus someone that's in risk and fraud prevention, the story is going to be a little bit different, and they're going to have their own different personal KPIs. So we try to marry those two things of what have we solved and how, and then relate it to how could it impact you, and then put those into very personalized, short, and attention-getting messages that we can execute across our multiple channels. And really, that's where we're getting the responses and the traction.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I'm just curious, your adoption of AI and different tools. So when you talk about lookalike accounts or other use cases of UI, where are you seeing the low-hanging fruit? We're in the early days, right? Where do you see the future? What gets you excited about AI?
I mean, literally, AI is kind of blowing our mind every day at how fast these different, whether it's an AI writer or something like a Glean app that can help aggregate different data sources. It's literally blowing my mind every day. And what we're really seeing is the only limitation of a lot of these things is the limitation of our own mind and how we're prompting it to ask us to help us. And so we're really building that muscle across the team. And I think we're making progress every single day. But we started with just more basic figuring out how to prompt an AI writer properly, and then figuring out which models are best, to moving on to then creating our own custom GPT that's kind of pre-trained with our buyer personas and with our customer comp data, what we've solved in the different verticals, why and how and who did we beat, and really starting to get that training in those custom models and iterate on that. And then now, as we've started to see strong success in these at scale, being able to do these really personalized messages that maybe then we had to execute one-off, is figuring out how we can use more of an agentic approach where it's going from flow to flow to flow, help us understand who we've connected with in the customer comp account, what does that look like in the account we're trying to target, go find and research us some names that we can add to our buyer group that we were trying to do manually before, and having AI assist us with that. And then figuring out how to string it all together into a flow, which we're still actively iterating on, but just literally the amount of time savings we've seen already, and we are early stage where everybody's learning this muscle. It's pretty mind-blowing, and it's pretty apparent that as marketers, as revenue teams, we're going to have to figure, those who don't figure that out and quickly are going to get left behind.
Absolutely. Yeah. Curious, as you started building these different agents, what the role of data plays as far as, there's all kinds of structured data, there's unstructured data, there's data, siloed data, and we all know AI has to have good data to have the best outputs. Did you have any data quality issues? And if you did, how did you overcome those?
Tons. We're still overcoming it. But yeah, most organizations today have their data that you need to action for this kind of a prospecting go-to-market flow in Salesforce. It could be in Slack. It could be in G Drive. It could be in emails buried in Clary conversations. So really starting to feed the pipes, starting with Salesforce, starting with Slack has a plethora of information in it that these agents can be really good at going out and searching. So we've started there. We've seen like night and day in some of the outputs that we have. In the beginning, the data was wrong, it wasn't there, but every single day we're seeing progress there. So it's not a magic wand, it's hard work, but really starting to pipe those agents with those data sources. Still got to fact check it. AI still hallucinates from time to time, and sometimes more times than you'd like, but we're really starting to make progress there with getting the right data together, and AI can help that. If you have unstructured data, too, have AI structure the data for you. Have GPT structure the data. So we've been using that kind of a flow. If you don't know what to write on a prompt, have AI tell it what you want to solve and have AI write the prompt for you.
It's amazing, right?
It is. It's crazy. But it's like a muscle that you have to build. Everyone has to build who's trying to drive this forward.
Absolutely. So before we kind of wrap up and move into, we do kind of a lightning round, which is still what we're fun and personal. So one thing that we see quite a bit is a lot of people just fundamentally wish they could move away from this individual lead base and adopt a buying group concept. And they have trouble just moving the needle. Either maybe it's a director level person and they know there's a better way, but they can't quite convince leadership. And I'm just curious, like, what advice you might give to folks to help champion that change and drive that change within an organization.
I think the more you can be transparent on the data and show that, sellers really want the same things that we want, and they understand the deal process and the buyer group better than anyone. So I think just starting that conversation with your individual sellers and your sales leaders, showing them the data that you have, and then working through that approach, even looking at who your MQLs are. And sellers already know that they're not effective, right? We're throwing these MQLs over the fence and they're getting ignored. It's actually causing friction. So like really just having that open discussion and between and building that kind of synergy between your commercial team and your marketing team.
Yep. Fantastic. Let's transition over to the lightning round. Let's get to know Heather a little bit more. So I usually love to start with this question. So what is it that you love about your job?
I would say what I love most about my job is what we've been talking about, right? Collaboration with my team, cross-functional collaboration with our sellers. Nothing is more fun than when you have a success together, like you have an opportunity that opens or gets across the finish line. So just that collaboration cross-functionally is my absolute favorite thing.
Now, Heather, there's always going to be a flip side to that question, which is what do you not love so much about your job? Or I ask the question sometimes a little bit differently. What's really hard about your job?
Well, not love, I was going to say the thing I not love the most is having to fill out an expense report. What's really hard? I think what is hard is this, what we've been talking about, this transition from old MQL demand funnel type models and really cracking the code on the best metrics to show. We're still figuring that out, but like really getting to that place where you're in that nirvana of everybody completely aligned on the same page. I'll admit we're not perfectly there, but that is hard, but it's also fulfilling when you can make a next step and have light bulbs go off.
Yeah. So I guess when you're in this process, you're learning as you're going, taking best practices where we can, making modifications where we can. Where do you turn to for inspiration? Like when you go to try to learn about this, what are your sources?
I feel like I see a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn feed constantly has new things that I'm learning about. One book series that I really love is Tech Powered Sales by Justin Michael. He's got now multiple books and a whole methodology around it, but it's really mind-blowing how you can use technology to break through some of these things that were very hard and manual. So that's one series that I've also really enjoyed.
I'm going to look that up. Is there any piece of advice that you got early in your career that's stuck with you?
I would say early in my career, I had a mentor. Her whole thing was approaching things with positivity. And so that helped me, like at a very young point in my career, adopt that approach. So even when something presents itself as a challenge or a setback, always try to take a step back and think, how can I use this as a learning? How can I use this as a trigger to maybe pivot into something that's more effective? So I try to incorporate that. Sometimes it takes me a minute when there's a challenge or a setback, but I always try to revert to that. Okay, let's take a step back. How can we approach this situation with a glass half full and turn it into an opportunity?
Now, you may have answered just there my next question, but what advice would you give your younger self, maybe earlier in your career, to the lessons learned, if you will, to help go through any of those tough learning lessons or bumps in the career?
I would say from like someone who's a demand or growth marketer, that's the lens. I would just say, make sure that you're aligning with your cross-functional team and your sellers so that you're always positioning and making decisions on prioritization on how what you're doing is going to impact revenue. Because it's easy to get sucked into cycles of doing things to check boxes, doing things to like show activity. But if you use that lens at the end of the day, that is why we're all here and working at these companies, is to drive business and revenue outcomes. So if you can keep that central to your prioritization and your approaches, success will follow.
Is there any advice that you'd give to help drive some of that alignment? Is it go out to lunch or have some drinks with the sales team, understand what's going on? Anything to just to drive that alignment and make it a little bit easier?
I think always just trying to be transparent. Be transparent of what's working. Be transparent with where the challenges are. And then always come to the table with as much of a data-driven story as you can. If you can focus there, then that's going to help build that level of trust and move both those relationships forward, and then the output and the productivity from the work that you're doing together.
Yeah, that's great advice. When you're not living and breathing revenue marketing, right, and you're trying to decompress a little bit, what do you enjoy to do?
I love the outdoors. I live in Colorado, so love the outdoors. I have a love-hate relationship with golf. I'm absolutely terrible about it, but I do enjoy getting out on the golf course and getting some fresh air. And then my husband and I love to travel.
Yeah. What's been your favorite place to vacation?
Recently, we went to South Caicos, which is a small island in the Turks and Caicos Islands. It was 10 out of 10. Anywhere with the beach, so I'll be happy.
Yeah. Okay, Heather, last question. For folks that are listening and want to reach out, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Hit me up on LinkedIn, or it's heather.adams@socure.com.
Wonderful. Well, Heather, I just wanted to say thank you very much. As I predicted in the green room, we're going to have a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for dropping the knowledge to everyone, and I hope you have a great weekend.
Awesome. You too.
Okay, take care.